Blockchain Show.
You're listening to episode number 74 with Boz Zou, a Toronto-based creative thinker who combines digital, branding, and user experience design to help major brands strengthen their customer relationships and stand out in a competitive environment. Ultimately, Boz seeks to help clients distinguish their brands with usable and desirable user experiences across the entire ecosystem: mobile, tablet, desktop, kiosk, ATM, and in non-digital and emerging channels such as wearables and phygital interactions. So we're very happy to welcome you to the show, Bo. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what got you into the blockchain space.
Hi, everyone. How's it going? I started as a user experience designer. If you guys are familiar with that term, essentially, it is really the architect of digital experiences, right? So every website, every platform, every mobile applications, you would have someone that has that title, whether that's information architect or user experience designer, to actually craft the whole organizational relationship between data structure, between interactions, so on and so forth. So I started about 15 years ago, and that was really the dawn of Web 2.0, right? If you remember that, right after the 2000s, that was the boom of the first wave of internet. And we see really, a lot of, at the time, a lot of money pouring into the domain, businesses really growing out of that. And then as time evolves, we moved into Web 2.0, where social media platforms, e-commerce, user-generated content like YouTube, so on and so forth, all of those really interesting platforms started to evolve. And then after that, sort of late 2000s, we started to see with the emergence of Android and as well as iPhone, of course, the whole ecosystem of what we call solo mode, social, location, and mobile. And that really opened up an entire new realm of digital applications. And now we sort of get into the phase of wearable technology, pervasive computing, artificial intelligence. And I can say there's nothing else that's probably, in my opinion, as significant as blockchain that would completely revolutionize how the digital interaction or digital ecosystem work. And that's really, my whole history of witnessing how web evolved from 1.0, which was essentially what we call information highway, if you remember that term, allowing people to exchange information at lightning speed. That was really the breakthrough of allowing people to exchange a large amount of information, multimedia information, through very high speed. That was the breakthrough. Web 2.0 then was really, we started to see this emergence of platforms. And so Web 2.0 was all about platforms where you have these centralized organizations which made a lot of money, right? Like Facebook, Amazon, so on and so forth, YouTube. They became the central host of data. And people feel the convenience and also they sort of contribute and interact with the platform. But the problem with that is all the data is controlled by the platforms, and they set the rules as well. And as businesses, we know they have their constraints. Their primary goal is not to serve the people, for the people, but to make money and help the company grow. So that sometimes presents conflicts with the general public. And we're seeing that in the recent news of Facebook scandals, and Amazon have similar issues as well, and many other companies similar to that. But with the blockchain, I think the biggest breakthrough is really the term decentralization. We're really seeing that P2P network really taking control of a decentralized network on an unprecedented scale. And we're really seeing the infancy of that world because we're still, as a human race, we're still just uncovering some of the use cases of this particular technology. But I can give you a very sort of layman term what blockchain is. A blockchain is essentially a pervasive kind of contract that does not need any physical medium, does not need two people to be present at the same time, at the same place, and does not, more importantly, need a third party to witness and to regulate, right? Normally, when we sign a contract, we would need a witness and we would need a governing body or at least a legal system to enforce it. But blockchain is essentially the ultimate kind of contract that allow individuals at different locations, different background, doing different things, but exchanging value as well as information on a set kind of rules simultaneously and autonomously without a centralized body, centralized organization, or even a third party witness in it. So that really changed the whole realm of value exchange. And we know that the whole evolution of humankind was based on that consensus, right? Back in the days, Stone Age, when you, as a hunter, that you hunt a deer and you want to exchange that with another person or another fellow human being of some of the other things they have, that's based on consensus and trust. So that's really the foundation of how human evolved from a sort of very rudimentary civilization to the civilization that we have today. And blockchain is really changing that. Blockchain is really allowing us to have a new type of contract, a new type of consensus, and that would really revolutionize the entire human being. So that, long story short, that's really what excited me and kept me in this field to this day.
That's interesting. So how are you implementing the blockchain today? I understand that the use case, and it sounds very, very exciting. So where did you take this idea, and how have you taken that from an idea to an actual implementation?
Yeah, so I came from a background of user experience design, and one of the things that we champion, actually, we as a field, right, user experience design field, we started the term design thinking. I think now it's a pretty popular term. A lot of the business talk about design thinking. Even government organizations start talking about design thinking. And that design thinking really involves a couple of key things. The first step is to think about the people as opposed to the technology. Right? So what do people need? What is the gap currently in our day-to-day life, in our financial system, in our social political system, and finding those pain points and gaps and opportunities, challenges, in other words, are opportunities. So we take those opportunities and challenges and gaps, doing analysis, and then from that, we start to evolve some of the key questions. What if this, what if that? And those would lead to the bigger ideas, right? So what we call the big idea. From that big idea, we can probably unpack a couple of components to make that idea happen, to bring that to life. So those components would then become individual projects or individual tactics that we would specifically address. So taking any of those pillars who would contribute into the big idea, every pillar is a potential business model. Every pillar is a potential product or service. And we would then take that particular pillar and then formulate that into a executable project. We would then involve again the end users in this design process to work with them. Of course, we would involve the developers, which are very important, the organizations, be that startups or big organizations within the ecosystem, get their opinions as well. And more importantly nowadays, getting the regulators involved as well, because they play a key role in terms of whether or not this particular idea can survive. So that's normally how we kick off a a project. Once the project is started, of course, then the question is, how do we actually fund it, right? Nowadays, there are many ways to fund an idea. For example, and very popular nowadays is launching a white paper and get ICO, essentially a token based on an existing cryptocurrency system, providing some equity shares. You can also go on Kickstarter, which we have done in the past to get some initial crowdfunding, or you can also collaborate with big organizations. Sometimes they see the potential in it, VC, angel funders, as well as big organizations. They would probably acquire some of the equities in one particular project, and then that would solve the funding problem. And really, like I said, we're really in the early days of this whole blockchain evolution. Although we're already seeing drastic changes in how things work, but I would say we're really comparing to the internet age, right? If we're saying 2000s was the boom time of the internet, we're really at the late 80s in terms of blockchain. So we still have I would say at least 5 to 10 years to go to really fully understand the scale and the application of blockchain as a fundamental technology, but we're getting there. I think we're really at a very exciting time. And the projects we're running, getting a lot of positive support, and we really believe they can make some positive difference.
That's great. Well, what sort of differences are you aiming for? What sort of user base?
I particularly, because in the past 5 to 6 years, I've mostly focused on fintech, financial services, and I used to work for big companies and collaborating, serving clients like HSBC, Citibank, Manulife, right, AIA, all of those major financial services banks and organizations. And I have witnessed firsthand some of the key challenges, and whether or not those organizations have, fantastic intent or fantastic leadership, with those organizations, bureaucracy is really some of the key challenges of how those organizations innovate and evolve, right? It's almost like trying to turn the Titanic, and you know how Titanic ended up with, right? It's really difficult to make even a 1 degree maneuver. So with those bigger organizations, it was really difficult to change, and the internal leadership was constantly struggling with that pace of change as well. That's why they started to sort of harness internal startups, so to speak, and every organization has some initiative like that. They would actually angel fund. They would actually put a pot of money to fund, whether that's an internal group of people or external fintech startups, and harness those ideas. So going back to your question, my particular interest and advocacy right now is to focus on the 2.5 billion, this is probably a new number to you guys, but 2.5 billion people today, we're talking about 2018, do not have access to a bank account, right? So 2.5 billion people never had access to a bank account for various reasons. One of the most obvious reason was poverty, right? So they basically lived in the rural area of Africa or Asia, like India, some of the Central American countries as well. People simply don't have the infrastructure, or the countries don't have the infrastructure to facilitate that layer of financial services. So people don't have access to banking. And the issues with that is then they would not have access to credit, which we all know, living in the first world, how important they are to grow businesses, even for personal growth. And also they don't have a very convenient way to do trading because they don't have a bank account, so they cannot accept virtual money. They cannot even accept wiring, right? So if they want to, for example, somebody living in Indonesia, one island out of the thousands of islands in Indonesia, they're growing bananas. And they cannot sell their bananas to somebody who really need it in America, for example, because they simply don't have the means to do that exchange. In the end, either their bananas would just rot in their field, or they would be sold to local dealers at very low price, right? So when we're talking about fair trade, when we're talking about lifting people out of poverty, having access to a proper financial services ecosystem is hugely essential to them. So, and there are many reasons why that didn't happen, even though we had banking system in the world for hundreds of years. Why still close to 1/3 of the population of the entire world don't have access to that? Because our original banking model deemed that having a massive infrastructure into every corner of the world is just financially not viable, right? Imagine if you are trying to build a retail bank in every village, every mountain, that's a huge cost for those banks. And on top of that, you have to manage people, you have to hire people. So it just doesn't make business sense to serve those dispersed areas. So the banking 1.0, the very rudimentary brick and mortar retail banking doesn't work for that particular scale. And when we move into internet banking and mobile banking, yes, that sort of solved the issue a little bit. But then again, you have the challenges of the cost of devices, the infrastructure, education, as well as many other issues. And for a lot of the interactions, even though now we have access to online banking, if you remember, in our case, our own cases, initially you still have to go to a bank to open a bank account, right? So nowadays it's still not possible everywhere to open a bank account remotely. So that sort of still presents the barriers for people to access banking. So really my particular area of advocacy today is to leverage what I just talked about, the smart contract layer, the remote consensus, the new foundation of trust and new foundation of security that come with blockchain and cryptocurrency to solve this large-scale problem. So really applying blockchain technology and cryptocurrency to help those 2.5 billion unbanked people have some sort of access to basic banking services.
Wow, that is fantastic, and there's certainly an untapped area where this sort of solution would come in very, very useful, and also it's something which helps people such as traders, as you indicated. So how far have you got with this project at the moment?
Yeah, so we're still at early stages. The project has been running for over a year now, and initially we're really just trying to figure out, like I said, right, what are the core needs, and without really going to talk to those people to witness, which I have done to some degree, and still a lot of work needs to be done, without really going to the villages, going to the rural areas, understanding some of the key challenges, their user behaviors, their understanding of banking, and how we can best address those particular issues. It's very difficult for us to really come up with a business model and a very appropriate use case that would make it work, right? So a lot of times, the biggest mistake technology companies make is that the end product or services are driven by technology, right? So somebody just came up with a good idea and they start building it. Once it's built, yes, it's a beautiful platform, everything works, looks great, but when you actually hand it over to the end user, there is that discrepancy. So the adoption rate, and this goes back to sort of the days when I was working with the big banks, even within their internal employees, right? So every bank tried to digitize their operation for cost saving, for transparency, for big data monitoring, all of that. Every bank has that digital transformation project trying to turn their paper and and traditional operational processes onto digital platforms, the best adoption rate is 10%. It's daunting. So when you launch a new platform, even to the most savviest people in terms of technology and financial services, you only get 10% adoption rate right off the bat. So that was really the biggest challenge. So we invested a lot of time and effort into understanding what are the sort of key barriers preventing the rural population, those 2.5 billion underserved population to access financial services. And we have had a lot of great insight. And on top of that, we have also started creating a consortium of different disciplines, different startups, different organizations, including the big banks, because if we provide the platform and the technology for the big banks to expand their customer base by 2.5 billion, imagine who's going to be on board. Pretty much everybody. So it's really a very, very exciting opportunities for the big financial organizations who have the big bucks to actually tap into this untapped market as well. Because once there's growth in that market, we know now the first world is pretty much very saturated. So really the future growth is about the future generation as well as the untapped market that we just talked about. And the third piece of the puzzle in this whole idea is to create some really affordable and accessible devices to allow the cryptocurrency and blockchain exchange happen on a mass scale. And that's something that I myself and my colleagues have been actively working on. Our goal is to have a cryptocurrency enabled wearable device by the end of this year that's under 50 USD. Maybe in the future we can even bring that cost down further. If you're familiar with hardware wallets like Ledger and Trezor, Ledger had the Ledger, the initial Ledger Nano was actually one of the most affordable options at 79 USD. The problem with that is Ledger Nano doesn't work standalone. You still need a smartphone or you still need a computer in order to make transactions of any sort of cryptocurrency. So the add-on cost of that system is still very daunting for the population that I was just talking about. So we're trying to make a standalone device that's under 50 USD to allow very easy and convenient cryptocurrency transactions without the tethering of another platform, such as a laptop or a smartphone, and also leveraging very basic network. For example, maybe 2G. We're talking about 5G today, but that's in the most developed world. So in some rural areas, we still have the vast majority of people using 3G, sometimes even 2G. The good news is with blockchain, the amount of data is actually not that much, right? So you just need a very steady but basic network to make it work. So those are some of the foot or legwork that we have done so far.
Excellent. So from our customers' perspective, how can they get involved and what can they do at the moment with your platform to interact with yourselves?
So there are many ways to get involved. I've actually already started a change.org petition. A lot of people have signed up, and I would encourage everyone who's listening to this particular podcast to also go on change.org. You can either search my name or you can search for the banking the unbanked using cryptocurrency. You can sign up for that particular petition. That particular petition is really a way to create buzz and also to reinforce the idea that this is an initiative that's very important, so that bigger organizations as well as investors would would invest more into this particular very important initiative. So that's one way to get involved. The other way is if you are in this particular space, whether that's in blockchain technology or financial services or even social services, right? NGOs, if you focus on areas that I have mentioned, feel free to get in touch with myself and we can talk about the possibilities to collaborate. We always need collaborative partners to work together to bring things together. And also later this year, like I said, we are going to launch the wearable device, probably one of the world's, if we're not the first, to launch one of the world's standalone wearable blockchain device to allow simple and very intuitive transactions based on cryptocurrency. And we would probably launch that on Kickstarter. So that would be a crowdfunding campaign as well. So everybody who's listening to this particular podcast, also feel free to follow us and also back us on the Kickstarter campaign so that we can bring that technology to life and ultimately make a big change.
Fabulous, thank you. So you heard it first here. Get involved, get on that Kickstarter campaign, and you can be there at the initial building of this platform.
Absolutely.
Fabulous, yeah. Very, very interesting, and that's certainly something I'll be watching.
Excellent. Oh, yeah, I would love to do a follow-up once we have the project launched, so stay in touch.
For sure. Yeah,
absolutely. We'll definitely keep in touch with you and see what's happening in that space. Thank you.
Thank you both. Great pleasure.
Okay, cheers.
All right, cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers. Ciao.
Cheers, bye-bye.
Are you looking for an easy way to buy Bitcoin or Ether on a safe, secure platform? Coinbase is the easiest place to buy and sell digital currencies. Sign up today as a friend of the Blockchain Show, and if you buy or sell $100 of Bitcoin or more, you'll earn $10 of free Bitcoin for yourself and $10 of Bitcoin to support this show. Join now using the link in this episode's show notes at theblockchainshow.com. To learn more, visit theblockchainshow.com.